What's up, everybody? It's Regan with Oil With Me, which stands for Own Your Life With Me. Today, I want to quickly chat through how you can identify sustainability on your food labels. When you're at the grocery store and you're weighing two options, what are some of the number one things that you should look out for on that nutrition label that will identify if that product is better or worse for the environment? Now, we know that sustainability is not in the US dietary guidelines. That was a fight we did not win for a number of factors. It was considered to be added into the guidelines in 2015, but it ended up not being considered. Why? I wonder. Probably because all of the ingredients and foods that are the most detrimental for the planet, for example, processed red meat, have really, really strong lobbying powers and huge industries. And of course, USDA beef doesn't want consumers to really understand the climate impact of animal products. So it's not included in the dietary guidelines. And obviously there's no sustainability measure when you're looking at a nutrition label. Nutrition labels have recently been updated to be a little more informative and a little easier for consumers to read, but there still isn't a consideration for, red light, green light, this is good for the planet, this is bad for the planet. We don't have that yet. So we need to be investigators as consumers, we need to be conscious consumers, and we need to know what to look out for. So I have a couple of ideas of things that you might see on an ingredients label or on your packaging that should be kind of a red flag. Now, I don't need to belabor this point. The number one thing you need to ask yourself when you're thinking about eating like a climatarian and choosing a product that's going to be better or worse for the environment is going to be, is there animal products in it? Is it meat-based? Does it have seafood? Does it have dairy? These are the number one contributors to the climate impact of the agriculture food system at large. And we know that agriculture and meat specifically account for more than 30% of overall global greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a massive driver of climate change and a huge contributor to the climate crisis. So first thing you need to ask yourself is, does it need to be meat? Could you use a meat alternative? Could you do a plant-based meat? Could you do a non-dairy alternative to your milk or to your cheese? I know now in grocery stores there are tons of vegan options that can kind of complement or replace some of those heavy animal product foods. So the first thing you got to ask, does it have animal products in it? That's a no-brainer to me. But here's a couple of more nuanced things on a label that you might not know to look out for. The second one I wanted to bring up is, does it contain palm oil? So our insatiable demand for palm oil as a society, you'll see if you start to look out for it, it's in most products, even peanut butter. It's contributed to a lot of deforestation in the areas where it's grown, such as Indonesia, Malaysia, Brazil, and it's causing a lot of habitat loss and loss of biodiversity. So when you are going to have a product with palm oil, it should say that it is made with certifiable sustainable palm oil. Try to avoid it if you can. You don't need it. Like if you have almond butter, you can find almond butter if you're weighing options that is just crushed almonds, maybe a little bit of salt. A lot of palm oil is added for consistency or texture or preservative, and it's not necessary. So if you can avoid palm oil altogether, that's the best option. But if you can opt for a sustainable palm oil, that would be even better. The next thing you want to ask yourself is, does it have a bunch of added sugar? Not only is added sugar detrimental for our health, which I'm sure you now realized, there's documentaries all over the place, study after study showing that sugar contributes to all sorts of chronic illness, disease, mortality. It's also really bad for the planet. It requires a ton of water to produce sugar. In fact, 88 gallons is needed to produce just 5 pounds of sugar. And we also have really heavy fertilizer usage in this industry, a use of a lot of chemicals that then leach into fresh groundwater, rivers, streams, and then we have water pollution and eutrophication due to just leaching of these chemicals. And, it's a big industry, right? It's another big industry. 145 million tons of sugar are produced in over 121 different countries. But it's destroying these natural habitats because it's requiring tons of land use. It's requiring a lot of water use, especially in areas where fresh water is quite scarce. And then those agrochemicals that they use in the production of sugar, think GMO, think pesticides. This is not only causing air pollution, but it's also polluting surrounding ecosystems, including our coral reefs, and contributing again to significant deforestation, which also contributes to biodiversity loss. Think about it, we're destroying our rainforests, we're destroying the habitats for creatures to live, and we're literally causing extinctions due to some of our agricultural practices. So The next thing I would consider, there's a couple of things that are kind of sad for at least for me, because these are things I really enjoy eating, such as avocados and bananas. Those are two that are really, really heavy water use and often are grown in places that are really far away and then imported. So for bananas, for example, there's a lot of food miles associated with those bananas. So that's embodied carbon due to the processing and the transportation for them to get to your grocery store. So food miles is another thing to consider in general. Not only are we thinking about the amount of energy, land, emissions, pollution that happen in the process of growing and harvesting that food, we also have to think about what happens post-production after it's off the farm. That could be packaging, that could be refrigeration, that could be shipping it all around the world and exporting it to all these different places around the world. So food miles is what we call that when something is shipped overseas, and you can account for the extra carbon impact, the extra global warming potential that's associated with that journey of your food from where it started as a seed to where it's ending up on your plate. So that's another thing to consider. So speaking of just additional products that are really damaging, almonds, unfortunately. I know you guys might be loving almond milk as a dairy alternative or almond butter, but almonds are really, really water intensive. And a lot of them, over 80%, are grown in California, which has been known to have some of the worst droughts in history, and especially now. There is just a massive amount of water scarcity. So one almond requires 1.1 gallon or 5 liters of water. One almond. So if you think about how many almonds are in your jar of almond butter or used to create your carton of almond milk, this is quite significant, because to produce 100 milliliters of almond milk, it takes almost 100 liters of water. So it's something to consider when we're thinking about using non-dairy alternatives. Obviously, not dairy is going to be significantly better. But when you have the different alternatives of soy milk or almond milk or oat or hemp or flax, we have so many choices as consumers now. Almond might be one to put on a moderation list. If you really enjoy it, obviously don't deprive yourself, but don't think of it as something to have every single day. The next things I would think about, so those are things that might be on the label when you're looking at the ingredients list. And also, obviously, I talk about this a lot, but avoid things that are called or labeled artificial or natural flavors. Those are the biggest regulatory loophole in this industry, beyond the GRAS certification, which I could talk about for hours, which means nothing, by the way. But when you just lump something in under natural flavors, that to me is a massive question mark, because it's considered a proprietary trade secret. Because if I were to know what chemicals probably were used in creating that artificial flavor, that's that company's proprietary information. That's their formula, and they don't want consumers to be able to potentially recreate their flavors. It's like part of their competitive advantage, but it's also a massive, massive loophole where they're able to disguise tons of chemicals, many of which are unregulated, under that giant umbrella of flavor. Really, really scary stuff. So if you're seeing products that have artificial flavors, even natural flavors, I would be wary. That would be a red flag for me. If you think about it, the most natural foods you can eat are not going to have any flavoring, right? You're not going to have avocados with natural flavoring, or quinoa with natural flavoring. It's just ridiculous. So that's a big sign that something has been really, it's an ultra processed food, and there may be a lot of dangerous, possibly carcinogenic, possibly obesogenic, possibly endocrine disrupting chemicals in those products. So be wary of that as well. The next thing I'd look at beyond the ingredients list is the packaging used sustainable? Is the packaging made of recycled materials? Is the packaging recyclable? Is it compostable? Even better. Is it made of cardboard, or is it double wrapped in plastic and then wrapped in plastic again? Non-recyclable plastic or flexible plastic that could leach toxins into your food. These are things I would really highly consider. You should look at the numbers on the plastic, and you can use a consumer guide to identify if it's a recyclable type of plastic. It'll say a number. Just because it has that little recycling sign doesn't necessarily mean it's recyclable. So you want to check to see if it's number 4, number 5, number 6, and then I cross-reference those numbers and make sure that you know how to properly recycle it if it's recyclable, or avoid it if it's not. The other thing you might want to look at is it a local product? We talked about food miles a little bit ago in this conversation. If you can opt for fresh seasonal produce from a local vendor, obviously not only is that going to support your local economy, but it's also going to have traveled a lot less food miles to get to your plate. So you're supporting your local farmers, which is really, really important, especially when they're competing with these giant conglomerate organizations. Um, and they have a massive competitive disadvantage. But it's also going to have produced way less CO2. It's going to probably be less chemical ridden if you're getting it from your local farmers market, especially if it's an organic produce. It's not going to have all the pesticides associated with it, which also contribute to tons of pollution of our groundwater and air pollution. So if you have to go packaged, see if you can identify on the package where it's from. Is it produced near you? Is it produced in the United States? Or is it something that's imported from Australia and you're living in Brooklyn, right? Or something that's traveling halfway around the world to get to you? And is there an alternative that you can use that is more local and that you can know that it has traveled a way shorter distance and therefore has way less global warming potential and way smaller carbon footprint? So those are just some things I would consider. Some of the foods that are most notorious for being devastating to the environment: seafood, especially if it's not wild caught. If you're using aquaculture, there's just a whole nother conversation there with not only chemicals, but also just the environmental damage done by the seafood industry. We know that processed and unprocessed red meat is a massive driver of climate change. And we know that dairy is a massive driver of climate change. And I share tons of graphics on my page that really explain that in detail. But then also looking at some of the other ingredients that are really notorious. So like I said, palm oil, added sugars, and almond-based products. Those are things that are really, really damaging for the environment. And then finally looking at where your food is coming from, how the journey it took to get to your plate, and what kind of packaging it's used in. I love products that are used that are wrapped or contained in cardboard or something really, really recyclable, or even better, something in glass that you can reuse. I am notorious for this is a pasta. This was a pasta sauce, and I then reuse the glass jar for a mason jar that I can use to drink out of. I never buy cups or anything. I just reuse glass bottles and jars from pickles or olives or whatever it was I was eating, and all different shapes and sizes in my cabinet for to drink out of, so, or to reuse or to repackage. If you wanted to make your own sauces, if you wanted to start fermenting something, making kombucha, these are great containers that you can then reuse and give a new life again and again and again. So being just hyper conscious of everything that goes into something that you're putting in your grocery cart. Obviously, don't give yourself a complex. Self-compassion always. Do the best you can. Nobody's perfect. We're all recovering hypocrites in a lot of ways. So obviously, sometimes I'll have vegan cheese and it's in plastic, and I'm bummed about it. But I'm not going to completely deprive myself forever. That said, I do try to do the best I can, and I try to reuse and repurpose and recycle whenever possible. So just things to consider as we're transitioning into a more climatarian diet. And as we start to be aware that our choices as consumers really matter, and that we vote with our dollars, and that every single decision we make, everything we put in our cart, every time we swipe our credit card, we're voting for a world that we want to see. And for me, that's a world that works for everyone. That's a world that's just, that's fair, and a world that isn't degrading before our eyes for the next generation. I am part of Gen Z, and I personally want to be able to have a planet for my grandchildren someday. So I care a lot about protecting our planet, and eating vegan, eating climatarian, and being a conscious consumer is an easy way for every single person to do their part.